And we're back with Kat, a chat with Kat part 2. I'm here with my friend from high school, Kat Ngyuen. Hi, Kat.
Hi.
So when we left off, Kat was telling us about her time in art school, studying to be a photographer at age 30 with a bunch of 20-year-olds in San Francisco. But
Yes.
before I get there, just a quick recap, because I went back and re-listened to your story to try and understand why it really resonated with so many people. And what I loved is that there was no like one linear dot that got you to where you were, where you decided to leave your branding career in New York. I know you said after 9/11 in 2003ish, it just felt different. But the story of you were in painting and you traveled, and painting got you into photography to record the scenes, but then you were less interested in painting and more about photography, and that you had in your professional side something that you weren't really vibing with, but still got to see what commercial photographers do, exposed you to commercial photography. And then you had a family member who saw that you weren't happy and recommended that you go all the way cross country from New York to San Francisco art school. So many different threads, and none of
There's so
them,
many
like,
different things.
you couldn't put them all together.
No.
So what I love there is like the importance of travel, the importance of having like people in your life who can really speak to you and say, this is what I see and this is what you need to do. But also, you never know what will lead to what. Your interest
Just
in
don't.
painting opened up a whole world in photography that you probably didn't see for yourself.
I never expected it. I mean, it was an option at Stuyvesant to take a photography class. And at that point I was already out on my own. So just the expense of it, because it was darkroom related at that point, it was just too much. So I was just like, oh, I can get away with getting some paints and doing painting, you know what I mean? And I enjoyed it quite a bit. But I had no idea that I would ever want to pick up a camera.
And then you mentioned before that it was really your travel, where you just took the camera with you and had all these roles, and that just going abroad and doing
Right.
something different opened up a whole new world, right?
Yeah, it just changes your perspective anytime you leave where you're at normally. And I had spent my whole life in New York or New York City, right around. And, we'd gone up and down the East Coast and we'd gone to the West Coast a little bit, but I'd never been international until I guess I was 26. Um, yeah, I was just too busy kind of surviving and getting by, you know what I mean? And then I went to Paris for the first time, and I went to Vietnam, and then I went to Mallorca, and I was just enthralled with all the beauty and just the scenes around me. So I was shooting just on a point and shoot. I don't even remember what kind of camera it was. But the compositions I felt were pretty good. Um, and then I was like, oh, I'm going to go home and I'm going to paint all this. So, but that actually never happened. My boyfriend at the time, he then gave me a real camera. My first real camera was a Nikon FA, and it was a 35 millimeter. I started shooting in color and in black and white. And then I took a couple of classes at Cooper Union, and I enjoyed them, but it still didn't click with me because in New York, like when you're studying photography, there's a lot of street photography involved, I feel like. And I don't know that that's my thing. I always felt I was invasive. I didn't want to approach people. I was a little shy. Like I didn't want to just approach people and say, oh, hey, can I take your picture? That's not me. And also I felt weird. I didn't want to use a long lens and be a creeper. You know what I mean? So that it didn't click. But then when I moved to San Francisco and I was shooting, I mean, San Francisco is the place. If you want to study photography or art, it is so beautiful. It's the rolling hills and the landscape, and 10 or 15 minutes in any direction, it's beautiful. Well, depending on traffic. But you go up to Marin and you have the Marin headlands, you've got the Golden Gate Bridge, you've got the ocean right there. I mean, it's fantastic. So it was a wonderful place to go to photo school.
When you went to photo school, though, it was just to study photography in general. It wasn't a specialization in commercial photography at that point, right?
I went to study commercial photography.
Oh.
So I got a BFA in commercial advertising photography with a specialization in still life product. and I also did some landscape photography. I had really wanted to shoot fashion. I don't know if I mentioned that last time, but I loved fashion on location. Think, Vanity Fair or Vogue, that kind of thing, big dresses in the middle of the desert, that kind of thing. But again, I realized, oh, I'm not 20. And you have to kind of be in New York or Los Angeles or Paris or Milan to do fashion. Like, I tried doing a lot of fashion photography in San Francisco, and you couldn't get the right models. Also, I didn't have access while I was in school. I couldn't pay the models, you know what I mean? And I wasn't good enough yet that I could be testing with the agencies. And the agencies just, even when I got better, the models that were available were not the same talent. You know what I mean? So it was just tough all around, and there weren't as many fashion stylists to help you with wardrobe. And I just thought, oh gosh, what am I going to do? I don't want to just go to photo school and do nothing. I want to work. And I really loved landscape photography and still life photography. So I did a lot of product, like jewelry on reflective, surfaces, that kind of thing. And I think that really helped to prepare me for shooting interiors, because a still life is just like an interior is just like a still life, but really, really big, you know what I mean? So you're just kind of tweaking where everything goes. And it's all about the angles and the perspective and the light, you know what I mean? So
when you decided to go to art school to study photography, I'm just curious, did you take out personal loans or school loans to do that?
So it's an interesting story. My father met with me in New York City. He was still working at that time for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And he was just like, I will co-sign some loans for you to go back to school. And then my sister helped co-sign some loans as well. So I did have to take out some loans. It was not, art school is expensive. And I chose one that was a mid-range art school. It wasn't like the Brooks Institute or the San Francisco Institute of Art, but it was still expensive. It was probably around $600 a credit, which isn't as expensive as Columbia, back in the day even, which was like $1,000 a credit, you know what I mean? But it was expensive. I'm still paying for some of my school loans, I'll be honest, but I started much later. So that's how it rolls.
But you took a real risk. You literally bet on yourself.
I really did. I had a nice job, and I had a nice living in New York City, and then to start all over again, just be a student, it was kind of crazy. You know what I mean? But I just had this compelling urge to do it.
How was just the adjustment going from New York to San Francisco at that point in your life? I know you mentioned how great it was as a photographer. How did you find San Francisco as a 30-year-old, lifelong New Yorker?
So I had gone to visit San Francisco a couple of times. My cousin who recommended the art school, and it was just beautiful. It was the first place I'd visited in the States where I felt like, oh my God, I could live here versus New York. Everywhere else I'd been in New York, in the States, outside of New York, oh, sure, no problem.
Okay, we're back. Sorry. So you were saying about San Francisco, you'd been there before.
I'd been there to visit, and it was the first place outside of New York in the States that I felt like in awe of the energy and the beauty, and I felt like I could live there versus New York for the first time. It was just so beautiful. Like, I fell in love with it, literally. So then when it was time to move, and I felt like it was time for a change, San Francisco just felt like the right place to be. And everybody thought I was crazy. Yeah, everybody thought I was crazy in my family. They were like, hey, it's super expensive there. And I was like, yeah, hey, it's super expensive in New York too. You know what I mean? So
you graduated from art school with your, what was it, an MFA, you said?
BFA.
So. And what was your then first professional work as a photographer?
So It's hard to say at this point because I had been picking up little jobs while I was in school. So I was third shooting for a wedding photographer in the Bay Area. I was assisting some people. I assisted a really good food photographer out there. And then I started working as a second shooter for this company called Open Homes Photography in San Francisco. And I learned a lot about shooting interiors in a very short period of time. But I graduated in 2008 and the housing market died. So all of a sudden I had to switch gears, because things were going well. I was shooting tons of houses, beautiful homes in the Bay Area. And then everything kind of tanked. So I found a company based out of Canada, out of Vancouver, and they wanted me to shoot hospitality because hospitality was doing all right, despite the fact that the housing market had crashed. So I started shooting the Pacific Northwest region was my region, and I was shooting hotels and casinos and resorts, that kind of thing. And not all of it was very glamorous. Some of it was like the Days Inn, and some of it was, you know what I mean? So, but I was on the road a lot in 2009. I was gone at one point for 3 months straight. Yes, because it was the summertime and they couldn't find anyone to cover the Midwest. So I flew into Iowa and then I drove through many, many cornfields. Somehow, like I drove all through the Midwest. I spent a bunch of time in Michigan where I got to spend some time with my in-laws. They're now my in-laws, but at the time they were just my fiance's, parents, right? But it was lonely staying in these hotels every night, a different city every night, like not knowing where I was waking up. So after a while, when I was in Michigan, I just started staying with them every night. It was nice. It was homey. And then I got really sick. I got H1N1. Like not fun at all. I was in Indianapolis shooting a Homewood Suites for Hilton, and I got really sick, and I didn't know what to do because I was staying at this hotel in order to shoot it, but I couldn't finish shooting it because I was so sick, and I didn't have anywhere to go because they were paying for my hotel if I was shooting, but not if I wasn't shooting. And so Jeremy's parents, they got in a car from Michigan, and 5.5 hours later came to get me from Indianapolis. And they took me back to their place to recuperate for a little while because I couldn't fly. So that was 2009.
How long did it take you to recover from H1N1?
Because I didn't catch it right away, even though I got the prescription for Tamiflu, it was too late. So I really don't even remember the first couple of weeks after I got it. I would say I recently realized I was at my in-laws' house for a week, but I thought it was like several weeks. And I don't even remember anything about the time there other than getting my prescription, once in a while getting some chicken soup, you know what I mean? And then they put me on a flight back to San Francisco. At the time, Jeremy couldn't come get me because he was at Tokyo Game Show. So I just had to fly home by myself. You know what I mean? I was a mess. It took a long time to recover, actually. So.
And so that I'm sure your experience there has given you a lot of empathy, and you had a unique perspective in this time for everyone who's gotten sick and everything that's going on.
You have to be as careful as you can be, I think, just to protect yourself and your loved ones. And it's no fun. I mean, H1N1 is different, I'm sure, in terms of what your symptoms are, but I can't even describe how bad it was. I was just out of it for weeks. I just was exhausted, and I thought some of it was because I had been on the road shooting so much. And I thought, at first I just thought I was tired, and I just needed a day off. So I called my boss in Vancouver and I said, oh, hey, do you mind if I finish the shoot on Monday versus over the weekend? And they said, fine. But then I just started getting ill, like really ill. Like I couldn't even go downstairs to the kitchen to get some saltines. Like I was so sick. Um, and actually, when we drove to drop off my rental car, I had to drop it off, and my father-in-law was tailing me, to the rental place. It was like 5 a.m, whatever. We wanted to hit the road, and he said that it was scary to watch me drive because at that point I was so out of it. Like I really was not doing well. I was kind of weaving, and I wasn't well. So I don't recommend it. And at the time, I didn't realize, oh, I'm in a different hotel every single day. I'm shooting the lobby, I'm shooting the gym, I'm shooting, you know what I mean? And I'm touching everything because I'm putting away wires and I'm hiding this, that, and the other thing. So the business centers, whatever. So I just picked up all kinds of germs, I'm sure, Now I know.
I'm curious, how has, I mean, that's a real grind that you went through. Has it changed your perspective in terms of work and wellness and taking care of yourself at this point in your life and in your career?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I was in San Francisco and I was starting my business, I felt like I really needed to grind it out because I'd started later. And so I was working all the time. You know what I mean? I would get up and I would be emailing or shooting, and then I would come home. I would maybe eat, and then I would keep, editing and that kind of thing. Now after dinner, if I come home from a shoot, like I'm done. I'm not working anymore that night, pretty much. And then I try not to work on the weekends because all it was at that point was work. And I mean, I enjoyed it and it was for me. So it was different than when I worked for other people in New York. But at the same time, like that's not a work-life balance at all. So I don't recommend that. If you don't have to, don't do it.
And I'm curious, so you live where now?
I live in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Raleigh. Do you find that it's easier to live a more balanced life where it's not all about just working all the time, living in Raleigh? Is there a different kind of culture?
Yes. So when I went from in New York, I was working until 11 o'clock at night when the cleaners came to the office, between 9 and 11, sometimes overnight, depending. When I worked at McKinsey and Company, like I would get calls at 7 a.m. from the consultant saying, hey, can you come in and work on this presentation? It was just all the time. Then I got to San Francisco and people kind of shut down at around 7. And I was like, wow, that's kind of nice. And then I got to Raleigh and it was insane. 4:30, 5 o'clock, everyone's on the road going home. I'm like, what is happening? I mean, seriously, people work hard, but they have a great work-life balance here. I highly recommend it.
And how did you get from San Francisco to Raleigh?
So I was in a rent controlled apartment in San Francisco, and then my landlord at the time wanted to move back in to her apartment, and so she had to give us a lump sum in order to move out. So we had this chunk of change, and we thought, well, we can move anywhere now. And the price of real estate in San Francisco is really prohibitive, right? And we thought about going back to New York. I had a realtor set up, and obviously my friends are still there. And, but I just didn't feel right about it. And I talked to my sister and I talked to my cousin who lives down here. And I have a bunch of cousins who are on my mom's side of the family. And they all ended up, like, they went to Chapel Hill. Three out of 4 of the siblings from that side of the family went to UNC Chapel Hill. And so they settled in the area. And growing up, we were all 2 years apart, my siblings and them. So we're more like siblings than cousins. And so I went to sleep after I thought we were moving to New York. I had actually told Jeremy, yeah, okay, so we have a realtor in New York. And then the next day I was like, we're moving to Raleigh. And he was just kind of like, what? To be fair, one of my cousin's husband, we had come to visit, we visited a lot. And I remember on one of the previous visits, her husband Charles said to me, "What are we going to have to do to get you down here?" And I laughed, but then he kind of did the soft hard sell. He's showing me this beautiful apartment complex in downtown Raleigh. He's just like, I just want to show you. I just want to show you what's available. And so it's like a 1,500 square foot, 2-bedroom apartment with granite in the kitchen, hardwood floors throughout. And it was the same price as what I was paying for like kind of a crappy apartment in San Francisco. So I was like, wow, we could live there. So when I slept on it and it just kind of clicked, and I was like, let's have a different quality of life. Let's try it out. Let's rent and see how we like it. And he was open to it because he can work remotely, So it was scary because then I'd have to restart my business again, but I have
starting over again.
Again. I have a big support system here. I have a lot of family. So it wasn't like I was starting from totally ground zero. Maybe in my career, yes, but not in terms of having a support system and family nearby. So we lived in downtown Raleigh for about 12 to 14 months. And we realized that we could actually build something in Raleigh. So we started looking for houses, and we found a plot that was a corner unit, and here we are.
And how much, curious, I guess you had family there who could vouch for what a beautiful city and place to live. In your consideration, was there anything of, okay, I know New York, San Francisco, I fit in, I feel at home,
Right.
A New Yorker, even though Raleigh isn't necessarily that far south,
Right. It's in
New
the
Yorker
South.
mentality, everything south of Jersey feels south. And then
Right.
also there are a lot of questions of cultural diversity and overall ethnic diversity. How much did that factor into your decision making?
So obviously I wanted to feel comfortable, but I had visited here quite a lot when my cousins were going to Chapel Hill. So the Triangle area, which is Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, they're all university or college towns. You know what I mean? We've got UNC, and then we've got Duke, and then we've got NC State as well. So it's not as diverse as New York or San Francisco for sure, but I don't feel like I stand out. You know what I mean? Although when I roll up with my 25 family members into somewhere and just a bunch of Asians, we increase the number of Asians by, an exponential amount. But I haven't ever really felt like I stand out or am weird. And, I will say I don't love to go wandering into small towns outside of Raleigh. I don't love that. Like when I was in California, I would wander around all the time going to photograph whatever, just driving up and down the coast. And I felt totally comfortable. But yeah, I wouldn't say that I want to do that down here. There are certain places that we go and we know, and it's fine. Like if you go to Charlotte, that's fine. If you go to Wilmington, it's a smaller beach town, but it's fine because a lot of people come in from all over. So if you go to Asheville, that's like 4 hours into the mountains. It's beautiful and it's very artsy and, it's great. So you just have to kind of know where to go.
Right. It's interesting. So the being an artist yourself, coming from cities that are known for lots of different cultural institutions, what's the pitch for going to a place like Raleigh for people who have kind of a Northeast or snobby, big city centric idea that there's no culture, quote unquote, when you go into different parts of the country? What for you is really interesting about living there, apart from the housing? Like what keeps you, like, what do you discover when you're down there? What really,
What
feeds
I
your
have
curiosity?
found is that there's a real sense of community and people, and I know that there is some of that in different neighborhoods in Queens and in Brooklyn, and you know what I mean? But when I lived in the East Village for I don't know how many years, I never even knew who my neighbor was. You know what I mean? Whereas here, especially in the interiors industry, I feel like I have literally gone to places where people are like, hey, aren't you Kat? Like they'll recognize me from my Instagram or whatever, and then they'll become my clients, and, I go to this florist who's my client who also owns a home decor store. And she, like everybody knows everybody, but not in a bad way. It's not so much that they're in your business, but there's this sense of, oh, like I'm comfortable. You know what I mean? There are people that I can turn to for different things that I need. So that's great. We have a really wonderful museum. The North Carolina Museum of Art is just beautiful. It is small compared to obviously the Met, let's say, right? But it is gorgeous and it is very well curated. And then it's on a bunch of land that's greenway, and then it has sculptures outside. It's gorgeous. It's one of my favorite places to be. So we don't have the quantity that New York has, right? New York just has more of everything, but we have these gems, in different places. And we have a growing food scene for sure. There's some really great restaurants here. I mean, it's not endless the way New York City is, and it doesn't have the endless energy that New York City does have. But I feel like if you're raising a family and if you're at a certain age, it's kind of nice to take it down a notch. You know what I mean? So.
And what are you doing now professionally in where you are, and how did you build that business?
So when I got here, I kind of did a little bit of research into magazines that I thought were good magazines. And Walter Magazine is the local Raleigh. It is one of the local magazines, but I thought it was the best. And so I reached out with my portfolio, a link to my portfolio, to the creative director. And unlike in San Francisco, where you could send out your portfolio and not hear back for weeks or months, she called me in 5 minutes.
Wow.
And she was like, let's have coffee. And I was like, okay, that's how they do it down here. So we had coffee. I brought my print portfolio. And it was funny because that was kind of an aside. She, at that point, just wanted to know who I was. Like she was ready to work with me. And so I've been working with Walter for the past, since 2013 or 2014, I would say. So I get published pretty regularly in there. And then that kind of spawned a bunch of other things. So I also shoot for HGTV show Love It or List It. And one night I remember I was at one of my cousin's houses and I got an email from one of the executive producers saying, hey, we run Love It or List It here in North Carolina. Would you be interested in shooting for the show? I saw your work in Walter Magazine. And I thought someone was pranking me, but it turns out that it was legit. And so I've been shooting for them for the last 3 years now. So that's great. And my business has grown to the point where I actually need help. So I'm still trying to figure that out because there are certain things I can't outsource. Like I can't outsource actually shooting, but I can outsource some of my retouching. I still have to manage it, but I can outsource some of that. And then I outsource some of my social media now with a great marketing company. You know what I mean? But I didn't know that it could be like this. Like my career is at the best that it's ever been. I think it's sort of big fish, small pond situation. There aren't as many professional interiors photographers here, so it's easier to kind of stand out. Whereas in San Francisco, there's a ton of everything. A ton of wedding photographers, a ton of interiors photographers, a ton of architectural photographers. So it's harder to, make yourself known. Whereas here, there's like a handful of interiors photographers. I mean, no, there are lots of real estate photographers, but there's sort of a difference in style of photography. So there's a ton of real estate photographers, but not so many interiors or architecture photographers. And I know who the other people are, basically, we'll refer work to each other. So it's kind of community over competition, which is nice. I've had other photographers who are really good, like just kind of message me, hey, I need this lens today. Can you lend it to me? Stuff like that.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I coming from New York, it's like, what? You know what I mean? When we moved into my neighborhood, I remember a neighbor waved to me when I was driving by. So I was like, what did I do? Like, what's up? And I was really suspicious. And then my brother came to visit. And at that point, it had become second nature. Like, I just wave at my neighbors and I smile when we see each other. And he's like, what are you doing? Because he still lives in New Jersey. So he was very confused. But yeah, I mean, I can't say enough good things about living here in terms of quality of life and also just career wise. It's amazing. Like, I'm so happy, honestly.
So when someone hires you for a shoot, what do you think is the perspective, the style that you bring that might be different from other photographers who do the same thing?
So I definitely shoot natural light. I think it looks a little bit dated at this point to have the studio lights in the images. Like, that was the big thing in the 80s and the 90s, is that you would light everything professionally. But it doesn't look natural. And most of the magazines don't prefer that anyway. It also causes a color shift in the rooms if you turn on incandescent lights. It turns everything a little bit orange, you know? So it's harder to tell what color things are supposed to be. It just doesn't look as nice, that's for sure. So I definitely shoot natural light. I think that's important. And I mean, I've been doing it since 2008 now, or a little bit before that. So I come into a scene and I know how to help style a scene. So the job is not just about photographing or editing. It's also about knowing what furniture or what home decor should go where in the scene so that it looks like a full, interesting image, you know? So I feel like I bring that to the table.
Do you think, growing up in New York City when we did, I don't remember anyone really thinking about style and design in that way. Do you think coming into your profession outside of maybe someone who, grew up in a different style of interior gives you a different eye towards what's really interesting in an interior? Like, you might be able to notice something coming from, say, who didn't grow up in a house like that, that you see, wow, this is really visually interesting here. This is what I want to capture. This is the perspective that I think will grab people's attention.
It's interesting. My parents, I love interior design, but my parents and my sister, they could kind of care less. I mean, my sister has a nice home and she wants it to look nice and comfortable, but she's not really, she'll ask me for advice. My parents, I remember we moved into this house in Little Neck in Queens, and it had wallpaper everywhere, but not the good kind. It was the 80s kind with the bold flowers and blues and greens on the ceiling to boot. There was a bathroom with like silver reflective foil and then flocked pink flowers all over the ceiling and on the walls. I mean, it was insane. And my parents just lived there like that for forever. They never bothered to change it. It just wasn't. So I didn't grow up thinking about interior design at all. It was really something that came about, I guess, as I traveled a little bit, and I would just pore over these magazines like Elle Decor and, Veranda and, all these magazines that I was studying while I was in school to set up shots. I just kind of fell in love with it,
In all of the different changes and kind of transitions you've gone through, I'm sure there are moments where you had either self-doubt or you were afraid. Is there anything that's kind of helped you each time to go over the hump and say, I can do this? Is like what gave you the confidence to kind of just throw yourself and learn something new each time? Learning, photography, learning interiors, learning what it's the business side of photography. What's given you the drive just to go forward and say, I can do this, even when you had those moments of self-doubt?
So, I went to Columbia for a time, and then I went to the Academy of Art for art school. And I will say, even having gone to Stuyvesant, that the hardest thing I've ever done in school was at art school. because they want you to, if you can, come up with something new, something that hasn't been seen before, every single assignment. And you have a bunch of other super creative people around you doing just that. So, and I'm competitive, right? Which is not surprising, I guess. So I didn't have a problem with learning the technical stuff, meaning, the chemical developers and all of that, f-stops, lighting, ratios, like all the math and science part of photography. I was not afraid of that because of my background, like at Stuyvesant or going to Columbia or going to Queens College, whatever. But I was really intimidated by the creative process. There was a class called visualization. And so you would have to do things like shoot the theme beauty, right? And that sounds really easy, but how do you do that in a way that's interesting, that isn't just cliche? Like, don't go shoot a flower, don't go shoot, how do you do that? And so I really struggled in that class. It was probably, I can't remember if it was my first or second semester, but it was definitely my first year. And also the ideas that I had for what to shoot, I wasn't good enough technically yet to pull it off. So there was a big learning curve. It was a struggle at first for me. And I was intimidated by the other people who already had taken some photography or just can think outside the box in this way that is just amazing. But it wasn't an option to not finish and to fail. Like, I had given up everything to go and do this. It never occurred to me that I would stop pushing myself. And I loved it. As hard as it was, I loved it the whole time. It was fun. It was fun to think of, how do I shoot beauty in a different way? It was fun to come up with all the pre-production for all these shoots every week for fashion photography. You know what I mean? It was great.
What I find really interesting what you said there, apart from just admiring how you pushed yourself through something that was uncomfortable, is I'm sure many, you're aware, there's still an emphasis, the way people are raising their kids,
right,
for a lot of the traditional achievement oriented, figuring out what the path to success is. And what I heard you say there is that though you had gone through a lot of places that were academically challenging,
right.
for you to know what your own voice was and learn how to express that and take a risk was a new experience to push yourself in that way.
It was completely new territory, because there was no right or wrong answer in a clear way. It wasn't like calculus, right? It was, you know it when you see it, and everyone around you who's critiquing your work knows it when they see it. You know something good and you know something bad. And you can kind of get constructive criticism to a certain extent, like, oh, the lighting here or the composition there, or you should have moved this object. But it really does come down to this gut feeling of, oh, because it's not a science, art. So there are scientific aspects to it, but it's not a science. You can't just replicate that all the time. And that's the other interesting thing about becoming a professional photographer. A lot of people can take beautiful photos, but you have to be able to keep doing that. You have to deliver it every single time when you go to be a professional. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what kind of, my sister can walk down the beach in Maui and she can take a beautiful sunset photograph, but she may not know how to get that again. But if you're a professional photographer, you'll think about the timing of the day and the seasons and the light and how do you get that again if you need to, you know what I mean? So it's just been an interesting journey for sure. I look back at photographs that I took early on in my school career and I cringe. I had good ideas, but I didn't have the technical know-how. And then there was this period of time where I was learning how to light, for product and for fashion. And I was studying all these magazines in a different way than I had just browsing through them when I was a kid, and it clicked. I was like, a good photograph is, hey, do you want to see this in a book or a magazine or an ad or, and if it's not that good, then it's probably not good enough. I know that's a lot of pressure, but that's kind of like what clicked in my brain. And I started to see things in a different way. And so I had one instructor for visualization where I did terribly. I think it was like the first time I got a C, in my life. I was like, holy crap. And grades don't matter in photo school, just your book at the end, right? But I still hated that I got this C. And then I had him again for a still life class a couple of semesters later. But by then I had learned some things. And I remember submitting an image to him and he said, oh, what happened? Like literally, like what happened? Because what I had shot before was crap and things were getting better. He could see the difference. So that felt good. You know what I mean? Like, oh, okay, I'm not sucking so bad anymore.
And was the difference more just, as you said, understanding
the
technical
technicalities
side of it?
Yeah, because you need that. If you don't have this is at least how my brain works. If you don't have the technical know-how to pull off an interesting shot, you can try as hard as you want with these ideas, but it's not going to come through in the image, So it was hard. And there were so many people who just already knew how to do certain things. So it was not a level playing field,
And you talked about growing your business. What have you found to be helpful as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, not just as an artistic person, to understand the right steps to take?
Well, so I think choosing to go to the Academy of Art, which was not a vocational school, it was definitely a university, but they had a lot of classes that were geared towards the business of photography. So we took an editorial photography class, where we got to take a trip to New York and we went into Rolling Stone and we went to, different photographers' studios. We learned about the business of photography. How do you put together a book? How do you put together a website? How do you put together, all these different aspects of your marketing? And also, how do you estimate a job? Because that's one of the hardest things to do in photography, because there's no hard and fast rule. You just know that there's charging too little, and the industry frowns upon it because you just kind of bring down what everyone else can charge. But constantly in forums that I'm in, people are asking, how much would you charge for this job? How much would you charge for this job? And it's never the same because the licensing is different. The use is different. You know what I mean? So learning how to turn to other people for advice was a big step in the right direction. And using what I had known from working, at consulting firms or banks or whatever before, in terms of how to put together proposals that looked professional, making sure that a lawyer looks over your contracts to make sure you haven't missed anything. Growing my business, I don't know that there was just one particular thing, but definitely realizing I needed to get published in order to get my name out there was a big step in the right direction.
So if someone's looking to get published now, they're wanting to take some of the same steps you did and grow, get their name out there. What do you suggest they do?
So the face of publishing has changed. Before, you would have a big printed portfolio book that you would just FedEx around to the different, or you would go to New York, let's say, you go to the different agencies and you would bring your book. But now, because of your portfolio can be online, you just have to know where to send the link to your portfolio. You know what I mean? But also you have to be diligent. You can send out printed promotional matter, like there are certain people who still just send out like these beautiful booklets, or you just have to get your name recognized over and over. And you have to have patience. You have to know that the first time that you reach out to a magazine, they may say no. and they may say no the 6th time. The 7th time, because they keep seeing your name, they might say yes. You know what I mean? And once you are able to get published, then the bigger companies, like the commercial companies, they're like, oh, I've seen that name. I trust them with this amount of money. And that's because editorial work it does not pay well, but you get recognition for it. You get, it's free PR. So I highly recommend trying to get published if you can. Do research, find out who the other people who are getting published are, follow their work, study it. You know what I mean? You kind of have to know, the market.
And speaking of being published, you are now published where?
I'm published in a book called San Francisco Architects, Top Bay Area Studios. It's out by Book Publishing, BOQ. Yeah, I did a couple of projects for this architect in San Francisco, and 2 of my projects are in the book from pages 150 to 155. It's kind of exciting. So yeah, you can get a coffee table with my pictures in it.
Okay. So last question, not sure if you have these kind of conversations, but I know there are a lot of people, even at our age, still
Right.
asking the question, what do I want to do when I grow up?
Yes.
Meaning that they're thinking of making a transition, whether it's a hobby or second stream of income. What would you say to someone who wants to do something different, may have a creative urge, but just doesn't even know where to go? What from your experience did you find valuable? What would you say to them?
Well, so for me, I needed to know what I didn't know. So I figured out I didn't know the technical side of photography at all. So I realized I needed to go to school. That's how it works for me. Not everyone who's a photographer has to go to school, but they obviously have to learn how to do the things that they need to do in order to get good photographs. So you have to figure out what you need to learn. That's the first step, I really think. And also, it doesn't hurt to find a mentor in your whatever field that is. Ask them questions, see if you can have virtual coffee these days. And just, I've had a lot of people approach me, like students in school who want to go into photography, and they've asked questions about how to put a portfolio together. I've had people who are, a friend of my sister's is a lawyer, but she really loves photography, and she wants to know how she can make that maybe her business instead. So we've had conversations about, what kind of photography do you want to do? And if you don't know, you have to just shoot a lot. Shoot a lot until you start seeing a pattern of what it is that you like to shoot and what it is that you're good at shooting, and then go after it. I personally have always felt that it's better to specialize in something, because being a jack of all trades is master of none. You know what I mean? That's the saying for a reason. And obviously with editorial photography, you do have to be a little bit of a jack of all trades. Even if you're shooting interiors, you'll sometimes have to shoot people in the interiors. So you have to know how to handle that. And then if you're shooting people, sometimes you need to be able to shoot them in an interior. So it's like this flip-flop, you know what I mean? But it certainly helps when someone looks at your portfolio, whether it's online or in print, for them to know what is it that they shoot. And you don't want to see 15 different categories and wonder, well, like which one are they good at? You know what I mean? Which one is their specialty? So learn as much as you can from as many people as you can. There's so many blogs and forums and groups that you can join. So kind of familiarize yourself with that.
Love it. Speaking of love it or list it, curious, what interior design trend are you done with, over with, don't want to see more of?
I hate to say it, and people are going to boo me for this, but the Joanna Gaines shiplap thing, I'm so done with that. Why? If you live in Waco, Texas, that's fine. But if you live in a city, why do you have a farmhouse? I'm going to get booed for that, but I'm over it. And the barn door thing, I'm over that too.
The barn door thing.
It's like you don't live in a barn. And one of my interior design clients had the funniest thing to He said, why would you pay all that money to look poor? I mean, it's kind of mean, but it's kind of true. So
Waco, Texas inspired a whole countrywide designed.
And I'm not saying that she isn't talented and that her work isn't great, but it's also like there's an environment that's happening there. You know what I mean? Like, but I just see it everywhere. Joanna Gaines is this, I mean, she's a brilliant person, right? She's this huge brand. She's selling to Target. She's selling books. She's selling magazines. I mean, it's insane. It's this whole lifestyle that she has. So she's brilliant in that respect, but am I done with the shiplap? Yes. I like never want to see shiplap again.
What do you really enjoy about architecture in the area that you live in now, about the Raleigh look or the North Carolina feel?
So it's very interesting. The kinds of interiors that I got to shoot in California are very different than the ones here. And I'm sure, you know, I follow some photographers in New York as well. And that's a totally different look because it's the city and you're in condos or brownstones or whatever. So I've had to get used to shooting sort of more Southern traditional sometimes, which was out of my wheelhouse in California. Like that just did not exist. But I've been inspired by designs that maybe I wouldn't have in my house, but I feel like, wow, that's amazing. I could never think of that. And it suits the homeowners completely. It's been really fun just to see the difference. California, it was sometimes more modern architecture, indoor outdoor living. There is a lot of indoor outdoor living in Raleigh as well, a lot of screen porches because so much of the year is temperate. But yeah, there has been quite a lot of Southern traditional that I've had to shoot, and I've learned to appreciate it. Although I did get to shoot this very modern house 2 days ago, which I'm pitching to Lux magazine. So fingers crossed that that'll happen. I'll let you know. But it was super modern. It kind of had a California, Florida vibe, actually. It was beautiful. I mean, I'll have to send you pictures when it's done. So.
Well, we're going to come down and visit Raleigh and see what it's all about.
Come visit, definitely.
Thank you again, Kat. I loved Chat with Kat Part 2. And looking forward to seeing more of your work everywhere.
All right. Thank you. Have a great day.